We're back at the Silver Dollar City Foundation, and we'll have an interesting conversation with Mr. John Baltes about what makes Ozark Mountain Country so special. We hope you'll join us on Living Legacies of the Ozarks. Hello, my name is Hayden Head, and we are once again in the office of the Silver Dollar City Foundation, and I'd like to welcome my special guest, one of the most enthusiastic people I know, John Baltes, who is himself a living legacy of the Ozarks. John is the president of the Silver Dollar City Foundation, the principal philanthropic arm of Silver Dollar City, and he has served our community faithfully in that role for years now. Before coming to the foundation, John was the vice president and general manager of White River Landing, the vice president and general manager of Silver Dollar City and Whitewater, and before that, the general manager of Silver Dollar City. Before coming to the Ozarks, John spent almost 10 years serving in executive positions at SeaWorld, both in California and in Ohio. I didn't know they had a SeaWorld, sea animals.
Actually, they did. It was the first one inland at its time in 1970. It was the first one opened with salt water at that magnitude. Not an aquarium, it was a full-blown SeaWorld.
In what city?
That one was outside of Cleveland, Ohio.
Outside of Cleveland.
Yes, actually in Aurora, Ohio, to get specific.
Well, that is specific. But you're not from Ohio.
No, sir.
You're from California originally?
San Diego, that's correct.
San Diego, great.
Yes, sir.
And I can speak to that because John received his BS in marketing from San Diego State University, and he's also a certified facilitator in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, one of whom you are, the 4 Rules of Leadership, and Servant Leadership. He and his wife, Michelle, have 7 children. I suppose all that leadership comes in handy when you're...
I would like to think so, yes. That's probably where most of it was learned.
I'm sure that's true. And John is currently the president of the Ozark Mountain Legacy Board of Directors and a member of the Board of Directors of Ozark Mountain Country Cares. As I said earlier, John is one of the most enthusiastic and dynamic and just contagious individuals. His enthusiasm is infectious. And I am so happy to be able to sit down and talk with you today, John. Thank you for joining me.
I've been looking forward to this. This is great. I really have. So I appreciate the fact I'm invited, and I am here to answer whatever questions you can come
Any
up with.
questions I have.
Well, let me restate that. No, let's just stay with the topic of Ozark Mountain Legacy.
Ozark Mountain Legacy, and that's really what I wanted to talk to you about. I had such a nice conversation with Tess Roth, and she and her husband Jory were instrumental, but I know that you were instrumental. I know that you were one of the early catchers of the flame, so to speak, and visionaries. And I suppose what I'd really like to begin with is what inspired you to invest so much of your energy and your passion in Ozark Mountain Legacy?
It never starts out that way. I think it's a process, and you get to a point and then something ignites. But there were really 3 things that I think occurred early on, and one of them is Jory and Tess Rolfe. When they came through here, they were, I think, on their way from Tennessee to go to Kansas to where her parents were. So they kind of came through this, and then it was their first taste of the Ozarks. They do ministry work nationwide, so they've been to a lot of places, so they had a lot of comparison to make about what places look like and felt like. Well, at one of those times through here, I think she was having her 2nd child, giving birth. It wasn't planned, 6 weeks early. And out of that, what ultimately happened is they stayed here because of that. I think they fell in love with the place. So they were a great influence because early on, they saw some things here. They felt some things here that the rest of us that lived here hadn't quite picked up on yet. They were so tuned in and sensitive that they saw something, and that's why they chose to stay.
Which, and Tess and I talked about this a little bit, is so interesting that sometimes it takes someone from the outside to come in to recognize the gift of what's already here.
Yeah, I think it's that old being too close to the trees to see the forest. Right. They saw the forest, and that's really what they were responding to, is this sense of what the culture had in it and hadn't been defined yet, at least to those of us that had lived here.
Well, and that brings up, I think, another important question is that the legacy that we're talking about has deep roots in these hills. And one of the questions I wanted to ask you, because I know you're a student of this, is what do you feel like is, say, the greatest gift that has been bequeathed to us from the predecessors, our predecessors here in these hills?
Well, let me talk about the predecessors first, because if I get the what, then I think I can answer that question. What happened when Jory and Tess were here is we began to want to know more about what is it they saw, what did they understand. And so we said, we're going to meet with some founding fathers, some folks who have been here a long time, and just listen to their stories. Well, as they began to tell stories, they talked about James Forsyth, founded the School of the Ozarks in 1906. Of course, Harold Bell Wright wrote Shepherd of the Hills. That was published in 1907. Guy Howard published his autobiography, Walking Preacher of the Ozarks, in 1944. Mary Herschend, after having visited down here multiple times, decided to stick around and lease the cave. Well, when they began to hear their stories, and then we stood back and said, now look at it. These are institutions. Those books are institutions. The college, which was a school, is an institution. Silver Dollar City is an institution. And it has a spiritual nature. It's a kingdom purpose. That's not a coincidence. So we began to see, okay, something's going on bigger here that we didn't understand. And so what we then did is to say, let's try to find out what that is. Rather than guessing, we actually went out and hired a research company, Jerry Henry's, and they defined a questionnaire, went out, and over 400 people responded to it. And again, it's not something we were making up. We were saying, what do you feel? What is going on in these hills? What do you see? There's a series of questions. Then, after we got that data back, we said, let's do some focus intergroups. So we did some town hall meetings. We drilled down even further. So what came out of that was, in reality, research that gave us very specific values that were occurring in Ozark Mountain Country. And the values individually were that families are really important. Family is important to people who lived here. Faith is critically important to people who live here. Friends are important. This American spirit, this flag, patriotism is very important. And future, intentional future. So we had these core values. Now, your question is, what is the greatest gift that these predecessors came? Because we did see it as a gift. They, the founding fathers that we were listening to, who looked to their founding fathers, really did feel it was a gift that was being given to them. And that we needed to be intentional to stay with that gift. So here's the answer to your question. Those core values in and of themselves are each individually important, but collectively they were saying the same thing. What they're really saying is, when you say family is important, when you say faith is important, your faith community, when you say friends are important, you're saying people are important. You're saying all people are important. So here's the difference between us and some other tourist destination area. They can treat people like they're important. The people that God brought here believe in their heart that people truly are important. And that's the difference. Then we treat people according to how we feel about them, and we feel they're important. It isn't a superficial thing. It comes out of our belief system. And that kind of core value is ultimately an act of love. That level of hospitality, how you treat people from that level, is an act of love, and that act of love is what gives people hope. That's the gift.
I think when you define it in that way, because you talked about kingdom purpose, and you talked about the various institutions with kingdom purpose, and I was going to ask you, how would you define it? But you have defined it. You're right. It's the deep sense of the inherent dignity of every person. And we would say by virtue of being created in the image of God. Right? Yes. It's that deep inherent dignity. Yeah. And there's something about the Ozarks, people that have come to the Ozarks, that has cultivated that sense, that has turned people into, say, lovers of humanity sounds too broad, but you get my drift, that they're willing to recognize the inherent dignity of people.
Yeah, and I think go back and you look at Harold Bell Wright, you look at James Forsyth, look at Mary Herschend, you look at Guy Howard. They epitomize that. Their work did that, how they treated people. You read it in their books, you see it at the college now, you see it at Silver Dollar City and how they treat guests. It's not a coincidence. So all of that is deeply ingrained in us, their culture. It's in our DNA.
You are right.
So that's why it takes hold the way that it does. That's why that's why people are so passionate. The ones that live here, they are passionate about the legacy of these Ozarks.
back to James Forsyth in the School of the Ozarks, now College of the Ozarks. You're right. His ministry was to the least of these. He came into the hills. He saw the condition of people, and he knew that God had a better plan for them than the lives they were living. And he operated out of that faith.
Yes, sir. And you look at those other institutions,
That's right.
the same exact thing. And that's what people can't put a finger on sometimes, but that research, the focus group interviews, all helped us begin to define exactly the difference between what hospitality means here. It's not about a restaurant. It's not about an accommodation. It's hospitality that is an act of love deep from within us. And that's why it has the impact on people when they visit here and people when they live here.
Because, and we can talk about the culture, we can talk about whatever we want to, as much as we like, but people more than ever want family. They want friends and neighborhoods. We crave community, maybe in a way that we've never had, because it doesn't seem to be as organic for people these days.
Let's go back to the Ozarks. People that came here depended on their families. They depended on friends. It was hard work. It was difficult work. The soil was not great. The work ethic was high. But the relationships that they had with people is what you're describing. And that's instilled. So being in that kind of an environment forced people, in a sense, to have to rely on them. And when you get that close to people and you treat people that way, that kind of grows and it's evolved over time.
That's great. Thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you for joining us at Living Legacies of the Ozarks. We'll be back in just a minute.
Living Legacies of the Ozarks is sponsored by Ozark Mountain Legacy.
Welcome back to Living Legacies of the Ozarks. I have the distinct pleasure of talking with Mr. John Baltes. And as we go into this next sequence, I was just reminded, John, and you may have seen this, I was just kind of at the Bicentennial Museum downtown in Branson and just sort of looking through files, and I found an editorial, I think from the 60s. And it was co-written by Jack and Pete Herschend. And in that editorial, now remember, this was back in the 60s. So, I mean, they're really having this broad view of what Branson is, what Ozark Mountain Country is, who they are. And they said, it is our gift of hope and hospitality that we're going to welcome everyone to our city. Our welcome mat is on the threshold, and we want everybody to come. And we're going to treat everyone with respect and with courtesy, and as you were saying, with love. So that was the 60s. And I think the question I would like to ask you is, how would you describe the core values of Ozark Mountain Country today?
What's interesting is, here's what the research, the data that came from the focus groups, it basically has said the core values have not changed since the time of Harold Bell Wright, the time of James Forsyth, the time that we were in 10 years ago and the time we're in now. The core values are core values. They're always there. What's changed is the world. And so when the world changes around you, those are either going to be a brighter light, and that's exactly what I think is happening now, is that the core values are the same, but because the world changed, it's quite frankly a condition right now where they are being challenged. The core values are now a greater light in a darker world. Because if you take a look around the nation right now, I don't think people necessarily have that high level of respect that you heard Jack and Pete talk about in that manifesto. You don't have everybody's welcome. There's more divisiveness. So when you have an opportunity to be a place of hospitality of that magnitude and you feel welcome here, it does give you hope, because there's a lot of hopelessness right now.
There is a lot of hopelessness.
Yeah,
yes.
And the only way you can do that is treating people as if they're important.
That's right.
So that core value, the core of that core value is still very strong and very evident and even brighter now. And so I think ultimately, because it is being challenged the way that it is, we have to be more intentional of being that way, so that more and more people are attracted by the way they are treated here. And they not only just come here once, they come here again, they come here again. See, there's a consequence if we don't protect that core value. If we don't, then we become any other tourist destination.
Right.
And then we are put that level. And what ultimately happens is that that's not going to get repeat tempo. That's not going to get people coming back here. Yeah. They don't feel different. They don't feel special in that regard. And so as you understand that, you have to be intentional to protect that core value, because the consequence is tourism dies, business dies, families do not do well. But if you do that well, if you're intentional to preserve that core value, now you are in an upward spiral.
Right.
Now tourism thrives, business thrives, families thrive.
Right.
You never stay still. You're
Right.
either getting better, you're getting worse. So we have to be intentional. That's what our forefathers, to their forefathers, understood.
That's right.
They needed to be intentional. That's why Jack and Pete wrote what they did.
Right.
They
Right.
saw was at risk in a nation that was involved in Vietnam at the time.
That's right.
And there was divisiveness at that time. And they saw that as an opportunity to share to the world who we are. We're doing the same thing today. We're sharing with a world that's divisive right now why we are different. And that is that hope, and it is that hospitality.
I love that. I hope that we'll always treasure that, so that we can look past the superficial differences of people. What we don't want to get political, but what their political inclinations are, or the things that seem to be dividing people more than ever. Look through those kinds of superficial attributes to see once again that dignity that they possess. And you're right that we are in danger of losing, but that makes Ozark Mountain Country, well, just to go back to your words, not another tourist destination. People can be distracted all the time if they want to. 24/7 they can be distracted. They don't want to just be distracted. They want someone to know them, who they are, not superficially. Yeah. Right. Not which news channel they watch at night, but who they are.
Yeah, I think if you looked at a lot of the people who are in the tourism part of the business in this community, the
Yes.
tourism industry, they have people that work for them who have formed friendships
Yes.
with visitors who come back year after year, not to see Branson. It's to see that employee at that location. It's a relational kind of connection for people who come here. So yeah, shows are important. Theme parks are important. All of those physical things are important, but that's not why they come back. They can get that anywhere. Maybe not the uniqueness of it, but it's the relationship. It's feeling they're important. Somebody cares enough about me to remember my name, even though I haven't been here in 365 days.
Well, as I hear you talking, and the first question I ask you is, what inspired you to invest your energies? And you began rightly with relationships with Jory and Tess. But I can see that your passion is really tied to people, broadly speaking. People that come here, maybe they don't know why they come to Branson. Maybe it was a banner that popped up when they were online, who knows? But that you're looking beyond all of that to the person that's standing at the front desk, who's standing in the ticket line, who's in the show.
And they're a person. They're just that simple. It's not a commodity. It's not another click on a turnstile. It's not another night in my room here. It's the relationships. It's the respect of those individuals.
But it's the respect, but it raises the ante on what Legacy wants to do. Right? It does, because it's calling us back, because it's easy to be distracted by the clicks on the turnstiles. It's easy to look at the number of people in the audience. But the realization, the deeper realization, is who we are going to be to the people who are here, whether it's a big audience or a small audience or whatever.
Right. Doesn't make any difference. It's that old one person at a time kind of a thing.
That's right.
Yes, sir. And that's where the connection is occurring. And that's why, as I said, they come back.
Well, then let me ask you this, because, you've been so instrumental with Legacy where it is, and what it's, for you, my sense of it is that Ozark Mountain Legacy is not just a rear guard action. We're not just protecting something, although we are. We do want to protect the core values. But it's living legacies, right? It's something that still is vibrant and vital. How do you see the legacy, the core value, the inherent dignity being carried forward in a way that it continues to be integral to Ozark Mountain Country?
For any of us that have been here a while, there's a phrase we use, is a city on a hill. And I think most of us feel that God has purpose in this region. He has a plan in this region. How many times have you heard people say, I'm not sure why I moved here, but something was just calling me here? Well, that's very real, and I do believe He does have a plan. And so if you come right down to it, we talked earlier about the gift, what I'd like to see happen, and how that's used. The point is, everybody has a God-given gift. He gave us a purpose. He's given us a reason to be here at this place and time. And if each of us would just focus on what our own gift is and give that to others, He takes care of the rest. That's all it is. If I can form a relationship with you, and that's all He's asking me to do in this moment, He's orchestrating thousands. It's not a coincidence we have millions of people coming here, forming millions of relationships. I think God's going to waste that. And so it really does come down to one-on-one, one at a time, and He orchestrates that bigger picture. So if each of us would just accept that responsibility and be intentional to express that to other people, that in whatever form that gift takes. We're not even telling you how. You know what your gifts are. Just give to people, whether they're visiting, whether it's your family, it's your church, it's the people that are living next door to you. It's just that simple.
Let me ask you another question. And I'm sure that you've thought about this. It just kind of occurred to me. So, a lot of the people who are watching you now and expressing your heart for legacy are going to come from communities that maybe they haven't done this. Maybe they haven't instituted a kind of effort to preserve the legacies and the culture and the vitality of their own communities. Is there anything that you would say to them? Is there something that you could say to give people hope so that they can take back what they've discovered in Ozark Mountain Country to the homes that they've come from?
That could be answered on a worldly level and a kingdom level. And I'll take the kingdom level one first, because I think that's the easiest one to answer. I think God chooses exactly what, I'm going to say is better. He has individuals He has all over this world. He has individuals that He's put into a place, time, for whatever His purpose is. And sometimes people like Jory, it's a calling. It runs that deep. They just know that that's what their purpose is. And so if that person is out there and they come to this community and they get inspired for whatever reason, then I think there's something that says, don't ignore that. We'll be happy to help. That was Jory's dream. It wasn't just to be here. He felt people would be ambassadors that came out of this part of the country, take it back, and he was willing to go wherever and help people start their own, just like we learned how to do that here. So the point is, if somebody feels called and they need some help, why wouldn't we help them? It's a whole kingdom purpose. The worldly side says, I'm going to work probably against that. I got my job, I got my family, I got too many other things to do. But for the person like Jory and Tess, that knew it was a calling on them at the point that God would be orchestrating the people that would be brought into their lives so that He could orchestrate that growing of His kingdom here on earth. And in our case, it's Ozark Mountain Legacy. In another community, it's going to be called something else, but if He's at the heart of it, He's going to be successful.
It's going to be successful. And people will be drawn to it like light as you talked about.
Oh, you mean Ernest Hemingway? Yes.
I was thinking about that, yes.
I'm sorry, wait a minute. It wasn't Ernest Hemingway. Who wrote the book? It was Mark Twain. Mark Twain said, what's the difference between right and almost right? There's a difference between lightning and a lightning bug.
Nice.
Jory and Tess were lightning, and God used that for a kingdom purpose. The rest of us were almost right. We didn't quite see it, but they gave us light, His light, and now you see what can happen when God's involved in it.
Beautiful. Thank you. I think that is an inspiring message of hope, just a sentence that these things can be carried on. I almost don't want to say replicated, because nothing's ever replicated. There's never a repeat of something, but that there can be new iterations, there can be new versions, and tying people together, building the kind of unity that we really want for each other, for our communities, and for our country.
And our families. Yes,
and
sir.
our families.
Yes, sir.
And our families.
We do.
We crave it.
Yeah, and He's the only one who can help us do that. Right.
Absolutely.
Catch that right, not almost right.
Not almost right, right. Thank you again for joining us. We'll be back in just a minute.
Living Legacies of the Ozarks is sponsored by Ozark Mountain Legacy.
Welcome back to Living Legacies of the Ozarks. I'm here with John Baltes. John, you are the president of the board of directors of Ozark Mountain Legacy. As we've already talked in our conversation, you've been there really from the start, since you caught the flame from Tess and Jory. What's one thing you would like us to know about legacy that you haven't had a chance to talk about?
It was always a dream of Jory and Tess. When we first started out, they said, we, Jory and Tess, it can't be our program. It can't be a program. It's got to be a movement. It's got to be a community that embraces it. And so because they championed that at the outset, the program was linked to them. And it was an unfair thing because it's not about an organization. It's about the gift that we were given. So if there's anything it needs to know, it's not about our organization. It needs to simply be a catalyst that ignites people to give in a way that God created them to give. That's what really needs to happen. And so that's the message. Not about the organization, but about what God put in their heart, and do they feel called to do something with that now?
Well, John, thank you. You're right. It is about the community. It is about people coming together, and it is about recognizing what's holy about the hills, about the people who come here, and about the lives we've been given in Ozark Mountain Country.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure,
Appreciate
sir.
your time. Thank you. And thank you for joining us at Living Legacies of the Ozarks. We hope you have a great day.
Living Legacies of the Ozarks is sponsored by Ozark Mountain Legacy.